Most humans perceive their world through a collaboration between sight and sound. What we see and what we hear combine to create a sensory image that our mind perceives as reality. It only makes sense that early filmmakers would strive to make cinema as realistic as possible by blending sound and image. A sound designer's role can deeply affect the way the audience reacts when watching a movie. But it's not just about the sounds that we hear. Sometimes the sounds that we don't hear have just as much impact as the sounds that we do. Silence in the absence of sound have been used by sound designers for decades and come in many different styles. Here are the different ways that silence in the absence of sound have been used in film to affect the emotional impact to the audience. The most basic way that silence is used is by creating true silence. This technique means eliminating all sounds, letting the images play without any sounds being heard. We find this technique commonly used in science fiction films, mirroring how there is no sound in space. Stanley Kubrick's 1968 film 2001: A Space Odyssey contains a perfect example of complete silence during the transition from the opening scene to the first moments in space. The use of silence allows the audience to feel the true emptiness of space, along with all its harshness. Another example of true silence is found in Martin Scorsese's 1980 film Raging Bull, in the scene where Jake loses his title to Sugar Ray Robinson. The use of true silence allows the audience to feel what Jake is feeling, the inescapable reality of the situation he is in. The next way that silence is used is authentic silence. Authentic silence is similar to true silence, but authentic silence allows ambient sound to come through. This technique mirrors the way we perceive silent moments every day, as we never really experience true silence. Francis Ford Coppola's The Godfather Part 2 contains an excellent use of authentic silence during its climax. The emotional effect of the scene is increased as it allows audiences to feel the pressure that Michael is facing at this point in his life. P.T. Anderson's 2007 film There Will Be Blood is another great example of authentic silence. The scene where Daniel Plainview rests after a day of digging carries great emotional weight. Unlike traditional use of silence techniques, the silence in this scene plays differently. The use of authentic silence highlights Plainview's determination and stubbornness, as even the terrible weather does not dissuade him from his goal. The third type of silence is selective silence. Used in many different ways, selective silence is the technique of removing specific sounds during the editing, but not every sound. Coppola's 1990 film The Godfather Part 3 contains arguably the best example of selective silence. The use of selective silence on Michael's screams truly enhanced the heartbreak, guilt, and sadness of the scene. Another example is found in Barry Jenkins' 2016 film Moonlight, as Chiron's mother shouts hurtful things at him. The use of selective silence allows us, as audience members, to feel the overflowing of emotions that the protagonist is experiencing. A more abstract way of using silence is subjective silence. Subjective silence is the style of presenting a scene which would contain silence in a factual, realistic way. Often the sound is representational of how a character would perceive it. Harder to describe than to show, here are a few examples. Steven Spielberg's 1998 film Saving Private Ryan is a perfect example of subjective silence. Sound design plays an important part in the opening scene set on Omaha Beach. The use of subjective silence makes the intense, visceral, and gut-wrenching scene even more vivid for audience members. Another great example of subjective silence can be found in Alfonso Cuarón's 2009 film Gravity. As this film is also set in space, no sound can be heard while the characters work in the zero-atmosphere environment, but vibrations felt through their suits are presented in a realistic way, unlike any film that's tackled the space sound problem. While it's a subtle detail, it's completely realistic.
It's been a rough week. If it makes you feel any better, I coughed up everything but my kidneys on my first ride.
So those are 4 different types of silence used in films. Each type is unique, and each film uses silence in the absence of sounds to different effect and for different purposes. The sound designers of these films knew the value silence had in enhancing the emotional characteristics of the scenes they were working on. Each of the films are improved by their sound designer's choice to use such an underappreciated but very powerful artistic method.